Hi everyone, my name is Devansh Parikh and I'm a senior data scientist with Sigmoid. And today I'll be talking to you guys about vision transformers. So, vision transformers are essentially a kind of architecture of neural networks which has been shown to be very effective in solving a variety of computer vision tasks. So, we all know about the transformer architecture, which has completely revolutionized the NLP domain with the implementation of the attention mechanism. So, vision transformers, or ViTs as they are known, are essentially the first successful implementation of transformers for computer vision. Prior to vision transformers, the state of the art models were mainly either generative models or CNNs. And while CNNs are multi purpose and can be used for multiple tasks, generative models are essentially uh, developed for highly specialized tasks. And the problem with them is that they need reconstruction to the model architecture or retraining whenever the task is changed. And this has led to quite a bit of heightened interest in like general purpose models like transformers. And we have seen that VIT has achieved state of the art results in almost all the traditional computer vision tasks like image segmentation, object detection, image classifications. And they have also shown advantages over traditional convolutional neural networks by being more scalable, etc., as we will see going forward. In the course of this video series, we'll be talking about the seminal paper on vision transformers, which has come via Google research, which is an image is worth 16 by 16 words, transformers for image recognition at scale. Now, let's look at some of the traditional use cases of VITs. So let me showcase a demo of how a vision transformer consumes an image as in the format of patches and then processes it through a transformer encoder and then passes it on to an MLP head for, let's say, a traditional task like image classification. And in a similar manner, it is able to solve problems of like image recognition, action recognition, captioning, segmentation, question answering, etc. Now, one cannot talk about computer vision without talking about the architecture which has been present for like the last couple of like at least the last decade, which is CNNs. So I'd like to highlight some of the differences between convolutional neural networks and vision transformers. So starting with that, uh, currently, obviously, like a lot of the state-of-the-art models that are being used generally are CNNs like ResNet, AlexNet, etc. While we have seen that vision transformers have outperformed those CNN models by almost 4 times in terms of like computational efficiency and accuracy. One of the downsides of CNNs is that due to the convolutional process, they are only able to capture, let's say, local relations between the pixels, while since vision transformers use self attention, it is a much more global operation that considers all the pixels in the image at once. Another feature of CNNs is that they have a strong inductive bias towards a very two-dimensional structure, and that essentially leads to translation equivariance. While vision transformers do not have that inductive bias inherently present in them. A plus for convolutional neural networks is that they are translation equivariant. So essentially, they are able to pick up a feature which can be present anywhere in the image, which is something that vision transformers, or essentially the model that we are looking at, is not particularly that good at. So along with that, we have seen that vision transformers have basically outperformed CNNs in almost all cases of traditional computer vision. And one thing to be noted over here is that these results are essentially on very large and massive data sets, but the recommendation is still to prefer CNN for small to medium sized data sets, as while VITs are very scalable to large data sets, it is computationally inefficient to essentially train them for like a small data set, although they can be transfer learned for a problem. And lastly, towards the conclusion, let's just talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of vision transformers. So the advantages are essentially, of course, like I mentioned, the attention mechanism, which is able to consider the entire image at the same time. They are scalable to like very, very large data set problems involving very massive data sources. And finally, like I mentioned at the start, that they are a general purpose model and they don't need to be retrained from scratch if the task is changed, essentially. Some of the disadvantages of vision transformers is the computational complexity and the resources needed to train a vision transformers from scratch, which is next to impossible for, let's say, a hobbyist or some person working on their own. And generally, it needs a very, very large amount of compute. Then we have the data requirements. So not only do we need a very large data set to train the model, we also need a very high quality data set. So the data needs to be cleaned and processed quite thoroughly before passing it on to the model. And lastly is interpretability. Vision transformers are quite a black box, and while the same can be said for a lot of the neural network models, the lack of interpretability and explainability in this model leads to a difficulty in explaining and understanding the results sometimes. But despite all of this, vision transformers have proven to do quite well in a lot or almost all of the computer vision tasks. So in the next video series, in the next videos, we'll essentially go over the architecture and take a deep dive into how vision transformers process images. Thank you. Let's take a look at the overall architecture of the vision transformer. So we can see that the input to the transformer is essentially an image which is split into patches, and then these patches are then converted into embeddings by projecting them into a lower dimension. Then we add a positional vector to each of these embeddings to denote their position in the overall image to get a series of positional encodings. This stack of positional encodings is then passed on to the transformer-encoder architecture, where it passes through a series of self-attention layers. And this basically lets the network weigh the importance of each patch's information relative to the others and captures the information between the patches. This final set of patch representations is then passed on to a fully connected dense network, and which has a classification head, and then that can be used for like classical computer vision tasks like image recognition, image classification, action recognition, etc. Moving on. Now, before we take a look at the vision transformer architecture or take a deep dive into it, we need to understand some of the fundamentals behind the attention and the multi-headed attention that is very key to the transformer architecture. So these techniques were introduced in the 2020 paper, Attention is All You Need. And this transformer network basically uses an architecture or a method which is known as self-attention, and which is neither a CNN or an LSTM, but the attention mechanism is basically what lets the transformer architecture completely outperform everything else in the NLP domain. The key feature of the self-attention architecture is that because it looks at various input areas at different times, it lets the transformer capture a lot of local and global relationships within the data, which makes it so good at what it does. And this same network architecture has been brought into vision transformers, which makes them so good at capturing spatial relationships in images and otherwise outperforming traditional CNN-based architectures. So let's take a quick look at the encoder architecture in a transformer which is currently based on which takes like a text or natural language as an input. So here we can see that there are two input sentences, bank of river and bank gives loans. And the word bank is common in both, but it has very different meanings. In the first sentence, we are talking about a river bank. In the second sentence, we are talking about a standard financial institution. Now, these words are then tokenized, and we split them. These sentences are then tokenized, and then we split them into individual words, and we convert them into one set of embeddings, post which they pass through the self-attention mechanism, and they are converted into another set of embeddings, which essentially capture the relative information of each word with respect to the other words. So, as an example, I will get information about the relation between bank and off, bank and river, and then bank with itself. And all of this information is then stored and then passed on to a decoder side of the transformer. Now let's do a deep dive into the multi-headed attention mechanism and try to understand some of the maths behind it. So the attention mechanism is primarily driven by three variables: query, key and value, Q, K, and V. So very simply put, there is something which we calculate which is known as the attention weight, and that is basically calculated using the query token and the key token. So the query is essentially the input that we are passing. So in the case of a transformer which uses natural language or uses text, every individual word is a query, while in our case for vision transformers, every image patch is a query. And we basically use this attention weight and multiply it with the value that is associated with each key. And in a very short description, what we are trying to do is we are trying to calculate the association between the query token and the key token, and then multiply it by the weight, or essentially the value that is associated with each key. So the architecture looks something like this. We have the value, the key, and the query going into like a scaled dot product matrix multiplication. And the beauty of this mechanism, or the core concept behind it, is that we take different combinations of the input query and we stack them all together. So we have one attention head, we have the second attention head, we have third attention head, so on and so forth. And that is what makes this architecture multi-headed. And once we have the output from each of these heads, we essentially concatenate it and then pass it on to a linear stack of layers. And just to highlight how the matrix multiplication works, we see that we have a weight matrix for each of the query, key, and value vectors, and we multiply it at each head. And once we have the results from every head, we compute the attention weight, multiply it with the value vector, and then concatenate the complete set of results. So the third image essentially shows the matrix multiplication of multi-headed attention. And the beauty or the benefit of this architecture is that it essentially attends to different parts of the sequence differently in different parts of time. And this practically means that now the model can better capture positional information, because every head will look at a different input segment. So this combination gives or lets the model create a much more robust representation. Now, each head will also capture a different contextual information by uniquely correlating words. So the same thing, brought down or brought to the vision transformer architecture, means that every head will capture a different representation by looking at different image patches from different locations in the image. So the model architecture, which is a part of natural language processing. Now, while the attention mechanism has worked very flawlessly for textual input, it has certain drawbacks when it is brought into the image side. So if or when we use the self-attention mechanism on image data, the problem that results is that because in text, we are doing a one-to-one mapping, like we are taking every unique combination by checking one word against all the others. If I try to do the same at a pixel level, my complexity or the computational cost goes up quadratically. So if, let's say, I just have one single, so I'm just taking this image as a reference. If I treat this as one single pixel, I just have to check it against itself. If I treat it as as like a 2x2 grid, the cost goes up. 3x3 grid, the cost goes up, and so on and so forth. And this becomes very unfeasible when I'm dealing with an image which has even MNIST is like 64x64. So a pixel to pixel mapping is not at all possible. So this has been solved by, instead of dividing the images at a pixel level, we divide them at a patch level, and each patch is treated as an element in the input sequences. So similarly, like in the case of the textual input, we saw that every word was treated as an input. A similar thing is happening over here, where, so if you remember in the architecture diagram, we can see that the image is split into n number of patches. The same thing is happening over here. And then each patch is used to create like a new set of embeddings. And once they, let's say, pass through the entire architecture, we are able to capture the image's local and global spatial relationships. So within the patch and between patches as well. So by using self-attention instead of convolutions, vision transformers are great at basically capturing long-range dependencies as well as the interactions between patches in an image much more effectively. And that is what results into a lot of the state-of-the-art performance in traditional computer vision applications. So that's it from my side in this video. If you guys want to know more about the standard transformer architecture, we have another video series which goes deeper into this attention is all you need transformer architecture and covers everything. In the previous video, we towards the end, we understood why the attention mechanism with its quadratic complexity is not the ideal way to process images because it gets computationally very expensive, and why in vision transformers we have introduced the concept of splitting the input image into patches. So let's take this image as an example, and let's say it has a dimension of 48 cross 48 pixels. Then ideally the vision transformer will split it up into patches, each having a dimension of 16 cross 16 pixels. There are two ways in which this splitting can happen. One is by, let's say, reshaping the input image into however many patches you want by looking at the height, width, and the number of channels, and you can get the required number of 2D patches. The other method, which is more interesting and which gives better results, is by basically projecting this input image onto a convolutional layer, and then by using a kernel size and stride that is equal to the patch size that we are aiming for, we can get the required number of patches. Now, the next step in the process, it basically involves projecting these patches onto a linear layer, onto a linear dimension, and this is done by, let's say, flattening them and sending them through a feed-forward layer to get a linear projection. This feed-forward layer contains the embedding matrix, which is talked about in the paper, and this matrix is something which is randomly generated. Now, one of the things that the authors have taken from the BERT paper is to basically append a learnable class embedding with the other patch projections to basically help with the classification task. One problem that we see with transformers is that because the sequence order is not enforced naturally, since data is passed to it in a single shot, unlike with RNNs and LSTMs where the data is passed in a timestamp or a sequential manner. So to combat this, the original transformer paper suggests the concept of positional encodings or embeddings that can be used to basically establish a certain order in the data, and that is exactly what is being used in the vision transformer as well. So we append a positional encoding to every patch to basically reinforce its position in the overall image so that the model can learn the importance of, so the model, essentially the attention mechanism and the encoder model of the transformer, can essentially learn the position and the importance of every patch with itself as well as with the other patches in the sequence. So now this combination of positional embedding plus the vector embeddings that we are getting from the previous linear layer for each patch will be the input into a stack of transformer encoders. The number of transformer encoders depends on the type of ViT model that we are using. Overall, there are basically three types of ViT models. We have ViT base, which has 12 layers, ViT large, which has 24 layers, and ViT huge, which has 32 layers. And they each have increasing number of parameters to work with. And finally, this stack of transformer encoders will output the final vector representation of each image patch. So the outputs of the transformer encoder that we are getting, they are then passed on to a multi-layer perceptron for image classification. The input features capture the image's essence very well, and this makes the perceptron head's classification task much simpler. And this head basically inputs the transformer outputs, and based on the special class function embedding that we appended at the start, it basically runs it for a standard prediction task. Now, we can definitely build and train our own ViT model from scratch. However, as with other transformer-based models, ViTs require training on a large amount of input data and image data, which has to be of a very high quality, and rarely, if anyone, has that kind of compute lying around. So if we want to use a vision transformer on a custom data set, the most common approach is to fine-tune a pre-trained model. And the easiest way to do that is the Hugging Face library. So to conclude this video series, in the past couple of videos, we have seen how ViTs performed really well on computer vision tasks and they have challenged the dominance of CNNs or convolutional neural networks in this field. And while that is true, the volume of training data definitely impacts the selection of the transformer models, and which is why it is always recommended to go ahead with CNNs when you have lesser or medium-sized training data sets. That being said, it has also been noticed that transformers do train faster and much more efficiently as compared to convolutional neural networks, which makes them the logical choice when we have a very limited training time window. The self-attention mechanism that has been used in the transformers has been very efficient in bringing awareness to the model and how it is able to look at local and global relationships within the image. So even though there are a lot of new packages which are coming out which help deploy transformers and vision transformers in a much more efficient manner, the fact of the matter is that while due to the antiquity and like the historical presence of convolutional neural networks, there are much more efficient methods to publish them as compared to vision transformers in a production environment. Recently, researchers have started working on a hybrid architecture which combines vision transformers and convolutional neural networks, which is called as TCNNs, transformers in a convolutional neural network, and that has found to have excellent results, while also working to combat the deficiencies of both these models. The largest vision transformer model is hosted by Google, and which is ViT-MOE, and has found to have set new records in the ImageNet 1K classification challenge. And lastly, despite some of the limitations that have been mentioned above, vision transformers do hold a great amount of promise for computer vision, and we expect to see more and more advanced models coming out that will drive innovation and unlock potential in various domains. Thank you.